Welcome to Project Book Club, where UFOs and UAP have close encounters with morning coffee. Grab a fresh mug and enjoy our steaming hot takes on this month's book that deals with anomalous phenomena. Brand new, classic, and often controversial. We talk about the ideas and we read between the lines. Now here's Bryce Zabel in Hollywood and Chrissy Newton in Toronto.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Project Book Club. As you know, Bryce and I break down some of your favorite UAP books, some that you might know, some you might not know. And we break down and get into the nitty-gritties of them. But before we get into our book of this month, Bryce, you have to tell me you have been extremely busy, busier than I've been. I was busy last month. You were very busy this month. Can you tell us what you've been doing?
Well, September's always a busy time for me because as you know, I used to be the chairman of the TV Academy, which means I have lifetime tickets to the Emmys, which means in September, there are 3 Emmy events I go to. The Creative Arts, the week before prime time, has 2 different events. So you go Saturday and Sunday. And then the prime time is on Sunday, the week later. And at the same time, Chrissy, to be honest with you, like I've just become a grandfather for the second time this month. So welcoming little Remy into our lives. And in a week, my youngest son is getting married. So it's crazy time around here, just crazy time, but good. It's good crazy time.
Congratulations, too. That's so amazing. I love the name as well.
Well, I have, my granddaughter is not quite 2. And that's Zoe. So we have Zoe and Remy now. And that's my oldest son and his wife, Emily, Jonathan and Emily, that have those 2 kids. And what was fun is on these Creative Arts Awards the week before, the Academy doesn't let me assign any tickets. So I have to go. I mean, I can't give tickets away and say, you guys go enjoy it. I have to take somebody, one person. So on Saturday at the Creative Arts, I took my daughter-in-law to be Noah, who will be getting married to Jared later this week, took her. And then the day after, I took Jared. So I got to spend quality time with these 2 young people who are getting married and get to see them, it really is just individuals and just sort of feel the love they have for each other and talk to them about their hopes for the future and all that. And at the same time, by the way, do some fun things. Noah and I don't think she'd been to the governor's ball that they have for the Creative Arts, Chrissy, is the same as the prime time. It's exactly the same. The people are different. So it's a really major fun zone. And so Noah just had a beautiful time with that. And then the next day I took Jared and we walked onto the red carpet and immediately ran into Mark Cuban. And Jared was just like, oh my God, there's Mark Cuban. And, he was just hanging out like a regular guy. And what was so funny about it is Jared was wearing a blue jacket. I was in a tuxedo because they say it's black tie, but Jared had gone in a blue suit. He looked fantastic. He looked great, but he was like, I don't know, am I doing the right thing? Should I be in this blue suit? I don't know if it works. And we walk in and there's Mark Cuban in a blue suit. Okay. So I just walked up to Mark Cuban and I said, my son's been very concerned that he shouldn't be in a blue jacket. And you have just solved that problem. I'd like you to meet my son, Jared. So they got a picture together and we talked to him for about 5 minutes. And he was just a normal guy like everybody else, which, tends to be the way it goes. And then the next week, I always take Jackie, my wife, because she demands it. No, and because she should get it. She's going, I'm going to the prime time. So she always does. And we had a terrific encounter too. We're walking down the red carpet and there's Noah Wyle, who of course is the star of The Pit. And he was also, if we're going to bring in the UFO connection, he was the star for 5 seasons of Falling Skies and did a great job with it. And so I have this thing starting back about almost 2 decades ago, where I went up to Kiefer Sutherland the night that he was nominated for 24 and just said, I got a great feeling about it, Kiefer. You're going to win this one. And he did, right? So I just started telling the leading man nominees that I thought were going to win ahead of time, that I thought they were going to win. And I was I'm about 80 or 90% on that one. So I said to our man Noah Wiley, not to, I've got two Noahs in my life. There's Noah, who is getting married to Jared, but then Noah Wiley. And I told him, I've got a good record. And I said, you're going to win tonight. So congratulations. And he did, of course. And his show won Outstanding Drama Series. And all I could think was that made me smile is sometime in the middle of the night, he probably was thinking, yeah, that guy told me, because I don't think other people tell you those things. And let's face it, if I'm wrong, nobody remembers, right? So they remember when you get it right. So I had a great time. It was wonderful.
That's amazing. And I'm also jealous, but also very happy that Seth Rogen, a huge fan of Seth Rogen's work. And oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name now. Gosh, the studio. Yeah. The studio won like 8 Emmys, and it was his first Emmy. Yeah, cleaned up so well. And it won 8 Emmys. I believe it was 8. It was his first Emmy win ever, or his first time winning 8 Emmys at any point in time. But I was so happy for the studio because I'm so excited for season 2. And to be honest, when I saw that, all I could think about was you, and how I know that before we did a podcast, or I think it was an evening, you went to go listen and see a preview of the first and last episode. And I was like, Bryce, I'm so jealous.
Well, I kind of knew it was going to win too, but not because I was prescient. Because I'd gone to the Creative Arts Awards and it was doing very well there. And so you sort of see the flow of things. And once it won its first Emmy on primetime night, you just sort of thought, this is probably the way it's going to go. And it becomes kind of funny because the first thing they do is they go up there and, they've got their little speech, right? And I think he won for writing or something, and then directing, and then for star, right? And so he got to give 3 or 4 speeches that night. So he sort of was called upon to stand and deliver more than most people are. And he was I thought Seth Rogen was a very cool guy, the way he handled himself. And what's interesting, though, is because he did this show, The Studio, which you and I both like, but it's totally insider. I have to tell you, if either you and I pitched something that was inside a film studio to anybody, generally speaking, they'd say, oh, no, nobody wants to watch insider stuff. That's inside baseball. You don't want to do that. And they wouldn't buy it. But because it was Seth Rogen, I guess Apple TV, they bought it. And it was great.
and it's genius. Like the genius of talking about, studios and the challenges that you work within studios and how they won't let you make masterpieces and make real art or real films while they're making that. and the irony of it all is that, the studio did let them make that, and they ended up making something that is unbelievably wonderful. It's shot well, the cinematography, the acting, the writing, the directing, like every aspect of it is just so well done. Like I'm so looking forward to season 2, and maybe next year you bringing me to the Emmys.
Well, you know what? That's not a bad idea. That would be a good thing. Although, it'll have to be the Creative Arts, but you'll like that too. Well, I got to say enough of Emmy talk, even though I could probably talk about it for a long time. And if it's Hollywood war stories, those could go on forever, but that's another show. Let's talk Project Book Club. Bring us up to date. What did you, it was your choice this month. What did you make us read?
It was, and I'm sorry.
Interesting.
We'll see what you think of it. I'm actually really curious. I was thinking about this all day. I was like, I really wonder what Bryce thinks about this one. I've had one other friend, our friend Dan McClure, has read it, and he really enjoyed it from what I know. And I know that Christopher Mellon recommended it to me. So the book, if people have not read this month, and I hope you have, it is Above Black, Project Preserve Destiny. And so it's an insider account of alien contact and government cover-up. And government cover-ups we know so much of in the past couple of years, speaking with David Grusch, Lou Elizondo, you name it, when it comes to government programs. And so I found this book to be very interesting. I was going to say insightful, but I don't know if it was fully insightful. There was moments where I went, I believe this guy. And then there was moments where I'm like, no way. So first of all, do you want to give us maybe a little bit of background, or Bryce, on, because people are going, if they didn't read it, they're like,
keep you and the audience in suspense a little longer here, Chrissy, and before I lay out my thoughts on it. But I have thoughts for sure. just so everyone knows what we're talking about. This is a book written by a guy named Dan Sherman. It was written in the late 90s. Again, Above Black, Project Preserve Destiny. It's really a memoir, kind of a whistleblower style account in which Sherman claims that he served in the U.S. Air Force from the early 1980s through the mid 1990s, working in electronic intelligence and later in a special program with the NSA, which was called Project Preserve Destiny. And basically, he says he was recruited into this program based on apparently his mother being abducted in 1960 and there being some kind of genetic modifications made to him that would make him a intuitive communicator. So someone who was able to relay telepathic messages from grays. And the book does supply photos and scans of his military paperwork, but it doesn't provide independent, incontestable proof of the extraordinary alien and genetic claims. But I think before we get into believe, not believe, because that's an interesting discussion, but let's talk about what he claimed his job was. I'm going to let you take a crack at that, and then I'll pipe in after that.
Yeah, it says that his job here was electronic intelligence, in ELINT. I have never heard of this ever when I first looked at it. And he was with the national security, so he was the NSA. He said that he was obviously contacted by the government previously. He said he didn't realize this till later on when he was, working in his position and working in ELINT as an electronic intelligence. He didn't know that in his previous working career that he was kind of being set up to move into this type of position when it comes to communicating with any form of extraterrestrial intelligence. So he's brought into this program, and it's a secret program where he's then taught how to be able to communicate, but he's communicating through codes and numbers, which is really interesting. And so nobody else knows that he's part of this program, this internal government program. And when he goes into his first kind of education and his first sit down, he's beside someone else, but they are not allowed to talk to each other, not allowed to have any conversation whatsoever. But they're learning how to decipher this type of code and be able to first communicate with this code by using some type of oral drug, first of all, which I find to be really interesting. You have to ingest this oral drug. And then from ingesting this oral drug, he's then able to have some form of communication with extraterrestrials. We don't know what planet they're from. We have no idea, what type of ET this potentially is. If it's kind of an extraterrestrial, we don't really know. It doesn't give us enough information about that, but he does speak about his educational process and how he goes learning to communicate this type of information and be able to document it for the American government. And you can tell in the beginning, like, he's really excited about it. And he's having, these moments where he's like, I can't tell anybody though. I want to talk. I have all these questions. I want to know more, but he's not able to. And so I'll let you get into maybe the other parts, Bryce, too, because there's so much to unwrap here. After he moves on from learning about this program and learning how to do this, he moves into a secondary program where then he has to actually use strategy and work, have a full-time job doing this, along with the work that he's doing as well as, I'm going to say this wrong, electronic intelligence, which again, I've never heard of before.
Well, you just said there's so much to unwrap, and I agree, but at the same time, there's so little to unwrap too. That's probably one of the biggest problems of the book. But just to bring everybody up to speed, he is saying he's very clear, and he has specifics. He's talking about the places where he worked and this special school that he was trained at. He lays it out as being at Fort Meade, an NSA facility, trying to unlock latent psychic capabilities. The computer equipment that he used, how he took these pills and medications, his security clearances, how he went from one location to another, how he got there. He's very detailed about the windowless van that he went in, and how they would drive him sometimes 20 minutes to the place, sometimes 40, so that he wouldn't know exactly, where he was going. One of the things, though, Chrissy, I thought was intriguing about it is that he's trying to talk about the nature of security when it comes to an alien issue. And what he says is these programs, the alien programs, he calls the gray programs, not necessarily, I think, because of the gray alien, but that's just his designation, as opposed to black programs, which we know are usually the SAPs, the very deep secret programs. But he says that the reason they put a gray program at the same place as a black program is, say you've got a congressperson who wants to be briefed about something. Well, they take him over there and they explain that the money that is going to this black program, which is completely separate from the gray program, and that person gets to say, oh, that's fascinating. I've been briefed in. How fantastic. And I see where my money's going. Let me sign off. But the gray program is then protected. And that's his claim. Now, I have to tell you, we'll get into the sort of the alien conversations he said he had, but it's a lot and a little at the same time. All right. It's a big, big claim. And to be quite honest with you, if you didn't tell me that Christopher Mellon told you should read this book, I'd be a lot more dismissive right this second, because I do trust Christopher Mellon. And if he's telling you that, he must be telling you that for a reason. So before I go any further, give me the context that Chris Mellon told you should read this book.
That's a good question. I was out for dinner with him at one point in time, and he mentioned it. And I believe I'd been out with him a couple of times for dinner, once in Washington. And I was with him. There was two other people with us, and he mentioned it at the table and said that you should read this and you should look into it. Not saying that he believes this or anything. It was something that he put on the table. The reason why I think he said it to me, and this is just my thoughts of why he said it to me, is because I'm deeply interested in how government programs affect civilians. And I have been, and I'm still looking into it now. Been talking to people. And so I think that's why he put it on my radar, because he's like, Chrissy, I know that you care about this. And so for him saying, put this into consideration, because it is a book talking about how governments know more and how they're affecting civilians. And I think which is interesting in the claims that we can get into this is that the government knows about abductions. And so the government knew this was happening. And he is a person that was potentially, with getting these codes downloaded, was helping in abductions. And to me, I know this sounds wild, but there was a couple moments where in the book where I went, well, that makes sense. We've heard, for example, I'm forgetting Josh Jordan's last name now, with Skywatcher. He's come forward and has talked about, being an adolescent that was tested on with the government, and it's a big claim. We also hear, we look at Richard Doty, right? We look at Paul Benowitz in the 1980s. He knew about it. They were using his mental health against him. And we also know that when people have made claims, and children that have been adjacent to these programs have made claims where I have been told myself that they were injected with drugs. So there are moments where I'm like, well, that checks off, because we've heard that that's happened before. And I don't want to believe that the American government's doing that. I'm not saying this, but this is something where I'm like, I don't want to believe that, but it doesn't mean that they haven't done it before.
Well,
and so, there's these moments I think it keeps happening, and it keeps building up. And this idea of having not a face-to-face contact with something is really interesting to me, but having some form of telepathy and being able to communicate it with it while being under the influence is very interesting. And to me, almost would make sense on how a government potentially could keep this very siloed into one compartment, because he then figures out, as he's doing this for a while, starts to realize that he's not able to leave this program potentially, and that he's stuck, and that he won't be able to go any farther. But if he is a byproduct of some form of being impregnated as mom was, which I think is an insane, wild claim. Yeah. It's so wild, I know. But the idea that not being able to leave a government program and him not being able to leave more seems something very smart in how you'd be able to compartmentalize this information. So there's a couple times where I'm like, ooh, this is really good. And then also, God, I don't know if I'm able to believe that. But the more and more I hear from people that are affected by civilians that are affected by government programs, the more I lean in.
The idea of giving someone drugs and all that, okay, on its surface sounds pretty bad. I agree. However, the way it's presented to him is this is a necessary part of allowing you to participate in this great enterprise to talk to an alien intelligence, that it makes you a better so-called intuitive communicator. Okay.
So let me preface what I meant by that. I was told by somebody, and I cannot obviously not say who, maybe at one point in time, that they were given a drug when they were younger, and that they were doing that so that they were able to communicate with something that was either an object or be able to move it. I'm not sure if it was extraterrestrial related, but it was a government program, and that they were drugged as a young child to be able to do that. So it goes hand in hand with what Dan is saying, what Sherman is saying, so that he was able to work on the same level or operating level as the CT. And so, to me, when I keep hearing these things, it saddens me immensely, but it also.
Well, let's move on from the drugs per se. Okay.
Fair
Because I think there's a couple of key concepts to put out here that sort of dimensionalizes his claims. The first is, why was he being drafted into this program anyway? And his statement about that is that they were looking for these intuitive communicators because something was going to happen. All right. Mm-hmm. And of course, we're afloat in the 2027 rumors and everything right now, which I don't give a lot of credit to. However, he's saying something was going to happen that was going to remove our ability to communicate technologically, all right? The equivalent of a giant EMP event or something that would remove that. And in the aftermath of our electronic communication system being decimated, these intuitive communicators would be spread around the world and would be able to communicate with each other to sort of keep mankind afloat in this catastrophe that was to come. So that's the context. But here's part of the problem in the analysis of this. He said he didn't really need the computer he had. That was just when he had a communication with one of these alien intelligences, he would type it up, right? Mm-hmm. And so he was really just communicating to humans what he said he was hearing from the non-human intelligence that he was supposedly in contact with. But the problem is, where's the proof of that? Because if the whole concept is he's hearing something from somebody, but then he's typing it up and sending to a human, how do we know that the humans weren't the ones that are communicating with him? I mean, how do you prove the reality of I'm talking to aliens? Because, he said he never asked them questions. They would ask him questions. Occasionally in response, they would initiate communication and he would be there to pick it up. He said that they told him certain things, that they had two sexes like us. He called the first alien he talked to, he gave a name Spock, and the other one he gave the name Bones. So he's very specific. That's the thing. He's very specific about the military process, right? But the military process is not the same as proving the claim about the aliens. So the mere fact that you're specific about that doesn't prove that claim, right? It's just, it sets it up. But the frustrating part of the book is that there are a number of people who have been classified in the US military who know about the process, who could then spin an alien story on top of that. So I'll tell you what I did this morning, Chrissy. I went to YouTube and said, I want to hear it in this guy's own words. So I found two interviews with Dan Sherman on YouTube. One of them was from 1997 when his book was brand new, and he was speaking at the International UFO Conference, which I believe is the one in Phoenix. I've spoken there myself a couple of times. Mm-hmm. Then the other one was in 2014. So like 17 years later. He was talking about how a movie might be made and how he was hoping the book would get, a wider distribution. But in fact, the movie was never made. There was no wider distribution for the book. And I don't know. I am left kind of stunned by the challenge of trying to understand this book. It's a fine read. He's a good writer. He uses the English language well. But also he has the Whitley Strieber problem, if I'm not mistaken, in that he's written a number of fiction books.
Oh, I didn't know that.
This is his nonfiction book. So
that's interesting.
I don't know.
No, I think that the question I thought is, where's Dan now? Right? Where's Sherman now? And so I would love to talk to him now and ask him questions and to see if, what he's saying still adds up. And then what he thinks to what's actually happening today. It would be interesting to see his perspective. There was a couple times, I think the abduction thing about his mom being bred and him being bred to it first, right off the hop, I was like, oh, I don't know about that. And I wasn't sure how I felt about it. But you are right. And I did think about this as well, about government. If somebody has worked in government, they would understand how it would work to write fiction around it. It'd be really easy. But I felt that the simplicity of the communication was really interesting. And we look at things again, I bring back like telepathy is a conversation that has been happening, right, immensely in the modern day conversation, especially around UAPs. And will even be, once I think Kai Dickinson documentary comes out and video, or in video, but you know what I mean, on a streamer, will then I think be more embedded into the mainstream potentially. So the conversation is telepathy. So we see things here of like themes are like telepathy, civilians getting hurt by government programs and being brought into government programs, and potentially drugging as being one is a consistent theme. So there's a few of them that I went, okay, I can follow this, but I had some questions too. And I do like the fact that they give his documentation, right? I think that's really interesting. But the idea of him communicating on this other channel and being able to talk to potentially if it is human or if it's an extraterrestrial, whatever it is, I thought was really, really intriguing because we hear that specifically a lot within the conscious worlds, right? Within the conscious communities and consciousness communities. So that's what really made me lean in a little bit more. But there was a lot of things that I questioned too when it came to, now that I know that he's a science fiction writer, that changes my perspective a little bit. But again, like you said, Whitley Strieber was too. So
sure. And I hope I've got that right. One of the damning parts of this is finding actual sources. And so I read that from a source, and I've been looking to find out who said that, and I can't find it right now. So if I've got that wrong and misrepresented Dan Sherman, I apologize in advance. But I did find an interview he gave to a journalist who I don't know, David Kirby, back in 1997. I just want to read people a few of his quotes from that interview so that you can go sort of get a feel for the way he's telling his story. He says, I was discharged a year early for an incompatibility. The only thing that makes sense is they discharged me because I had already made the decision that I was going to write the book. Part of that is confusing to me because no matter how he dices the black versus gray parts of it, if he's really communicating with aliens, it's hard for me to believe that the people who were teaching him how to do this and counting on him to do it are just fine with him writing a book about it. But, that is a problem that lots of people have faced. Lou Elizondo's faced it. Mm-hmm. Others will. Then he described what the training was like. And he said, I was there to establish communication links. I was supposed to receive messages verbatim and type them into the computer. The training started with gibberish, but as time went on, it became clear it was a language. I was told I was communicating with another life form. Okay, here's how he said the process affected him physically. I would get headaches. My head would just pound, and I'd have ringing in my ears. It was not pleasant. It wasn't a natural thing for me to do. I don't even like to talk on the phone, and here I am supposedly talking to someone light years away. Then he talked about how he felt about the assignment. I was the only person on the base involved. There was nobody else I could talk to, and the people I reported to They weren't telling me anything either. I was just the middleman, just a conduit. Now, here's the most interesting thing he said to that in that interview, where he's questioning the nature of the whole program. This is a quote from that interview. Dan Sherman. When you're in the military, you don't question orders. If they can tell you that you're communicating with aliens, you just do it. But the more I did it, the more I wondered, is this really what's going on? Or am I being used for something else? And Chrissy, I have to tell you,
that makes sense.
that is the quote that rings my bell, because I have the same question. The more I read his book, the more he did it, I had the same questions. Is that really what's going on? Or was he being used for something else? All I know is that he left under, he got out, and in his interviews, he talks repeatedly about that he did this book for revenge because of his resentment about the assignment he had to carry on. So anytime revenge or resentment are in the picture about a book coming out, that does color it a little bit. I mean, say what you will about Whitley Strieber's book. He's not writing them out of revenge against anybody. He appears to be trying to just lay it out. But this guy, Dan Sherman, had issues, and he's not shy about it. I'm not attacking him for it. I'm just saying you got to take that as part of the big picture. So all of that is swirling in my head, and I'm sure it's swirling around in yours at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't blame Dan Sherman for it. If he is, and this is accurate and this is real, I don't blame him for wanting some form of revenge. And if a book is your revenge, well, gosh, let it be that. Things could be worse, unfortunately. So let a book be what it is. If you want, that's how you want to get the truth forward. But you're right. I think it's a really good point that you brought up. I think it's probably the most important point, and he says it as well, is that maybe he was used for something else. And we see that, we looked at the Washington Post for Susan Goff, communications director of defense, has said that they've used programs, right, and extraterrestrials and to use for government programs, and use that type of narrative to use for government cover-ups. So, who says that this wasn't something that they compartmentalized and told him as well? It's for sure possible. The question is why. And when he started to get better at it and realized it was like latitude and longitude, and it was locations that he was, getting told, is very interesting and scary at the same time.
And he assumed those locations that he was getting were about abductions.
So
that those were places where abductions were going to happen.
Right. And this is what I was going to bring up is, abductions happened so much within the 70s and the 80s consistently. When was he working again on the base when he was doing this? Was it specifically in the 70s or the 80s? It was 90s.
No, it was 90s.
It was 90s.
So, 80s, it sounds like late 80s into the 90s. In the mid 90s, 95 or something like that, he leaves and then writes this book. And, my question, I guess partly is, if Lou Elizondo had to go through a year-long DOPSA kind of review, where was the review on this book? Why wasn't it at that level? And here's the other thing I was going to tell you. The reason I'm
Maybe he just released it.
Possibly. The reason I'm so interested in the Chris Mellon connection is that this book, I had known about it for years. I'd seen it, and every time I looked at it thinking, well, should I read this or whatever? It just looked like self-published fringe. That's how it's presented. If you go to Amazon to look for it, it just looks like it's hard to get. It hasn't been updated. It's not with the new publisher. You can't find a lot from Dan Sherman. I would like to know, where is Dan Sherman right now? As you said, did you ever figure out anything about that? Do we know anything about him today?
No, and Dan, if you're listening, send us a note, because I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
The reason why I think this book is so important right now, and the reason why I suggested it, because my intuition even says, and what we're seeing and what I know other people are working on, not just myself, and looking into, are how civilians have, over the years, and from what we know, it started even in the 80s immensely. Let's just say with Paul Benowitz as one of the first cases attached to UAP. But even before that, we've seen multiple cases. We look at MK Ultra, we look at all these different types of programs, and there's so many of it. Even in our last book, right? When we looked at, they talked about all the government programs that affected civilians. So, and Tom DeLonge focuses on that. right, and Peter Levenda focus on how and name a bunch of programs that have affected civilians. So this is why I brought it up, because I feel that it is the right time and people are looking into it, and we're having conversations about what are governments doing to civilians that are not above board and against the law. And so I think that this book is important to look at. It doesn't mean that we don't know if he's lying or not. We have no idea. Like, you're right, it hasn't gone through DOPSR from what we know of. Potentially, if he was doing this in some form of revenge, he wouldn't put it through DOPSR. He would have just self-published it, right? Why would you do that? And then the question is, where is Dan now? It's very interesting why he might disappear or has disappeared. So I think it's important because people are having these conversations about what is happening to civilians. And I think that it's timely. I think it's timely. And I think it's something that we can add into. Doesn't mean if I would love to talk to Dan myself, and hey, Dan, if you ever hear this podcast, please send me an email or an Instagram note or an X note, because I would love to talk to you to learn more about it. Because I think that this is going to keep happening. And Dan, is, if this is true, is one of the people that was affected by these programs. I've talked to people that have, been adjacent to MK Ultra programs in the most recent week. So I'm seeing this on my end consistently being talked about. So I think it's par for the course.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it's so hard. I'm going to divert for just 1 second. Because when we get it wrong, I want to correct it in the next episode. From our last episode, when we were doing the God's Man in War, the war book, I made the erroneous statement that Tom DeLonge had written the 3 nonfiction books with Peter Levenda, and then that he had written his 3 fiction books with Levenda too, but that's not true. He wrote his 3 fiction books, and maybe only 2 so far, but with A.J. Hartley, 2 separate people, not the same people. So apologies to leaving A.J. Hartley out. Listen, I think we should each let's just do some closing remarks here. I think we've reached the point where we're not quite going to be able to figure it out. Let's lay our own thoughts on the table, and then I will surprise you with the pick for next month. And maybe it'll be a little more mainstream so that we can find out what we're doing. But I'll let you go first. What are your closing thoughts here?
I don't know what happened to Dan Sherman is real or not, but it really piqued my interest. And Dan has been added onto my list of many people that have probably been affected potentially from government programs. So I'm going to give it, if I have to do a 1.5 thumb up on this. Not my favorite out of all of the books you read, but it was a quick little read. And so I suggest if anybody wants to read a book and is interested and doesn't have a lot of time, for sure, you can pick this up. It was only like 120 pages, I think. So it's a really fast read, and it's an interesting story, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, I'll stipulate most of that. Here's where I come down on this. After hearing Dan Sherman's account, I find myself grappling with a profound skepticism about it. Now, if I had to wager my house on the veracity of his story, I wouldn't do it. The idea that the U.S. Air Force trained individuals to communicate telepathically with extraterrestrials, as Sherman claims, without profound evidence does strain credulity a bit. However, the absence of concrete evidence doesn't entirely dismiss the probability or the possibility. So the truth, at best for me, remains a 50-50 proposition. Is that enough to recommend you read the book? I don't know. I will say this. Since publishing Above Black, Sherman, to the best of my knowledge, and again, if I'm wrong, I want to be straightened out on this, but I don't think he's provided additional proof or details to substantiate these claims, which raises a critical question. How could such a program operate under the radar of government and military oversight? And, he explains that it lies in the nature of Black projects, but a lot of people are coming forward. Where is the corroboration from other people coming forward about what Dan Sherman is saying here? If Sherman was indeed part of one of these kinds of programs, the very structure of these projects, it seems like, would inherently limit the dissemination of information. So it makes independent verification really difficult for him, for me, and maybe for a possible corroborating whistleblower. So here's the deal. In the end, I just remain skeptical. I can't categorically dismiss what Dan Sherman has to say and his experience, but the lack of definitive evidence for me leaves the door too far open. And the possibility that there is more to a story than meets the eye, it's there, but I'm not seeing it right now, Chrissy. I'm just not seeing it.
That's totally fair. And I think you're right on that. And I also would like other witnesses to come forward. That would be very interesting. And I would be curious to ask someone like Lou Elizondo, David Grusch, people that have been working in intelligence, if they've read this book and if they've heard anything too internally. That's something that I would ask them too, what their thoughts are. Because
well, that's
you're
a
right,
great follow-up, by the way.
Yeah.
If indeed anybody that we talk to in the next month, now I'm up on it, I'll ask them, and I hope you will too, and we'll report that in the next show.
Yeah, because I think that, or if anyone's listening, please let us know what you've heard, obviously, about Sherman as well, right? Because we'd like to hear that. But you're right. Right now, it's just a story, and there isn't a lot of evidence, just his credentials, which is still evidence, with saying where he worked, but we don't have anything else. But you know what? I will say I've heard a lot of UFO tales from very suspicious sources myself that would have even called themselves whistleblower. And I've had it said to my face, and I instantly knew they were lying. This one, though, I've read it. I've not heard, obviously, from Dan Sherman's face to see how I feel, if it's accurate or not, even just through my own intuition. But I feel if I had to choose a story, I'd probably choose this one instead of other ones I've heard.
Because it's funny.
Because to me, I was at least it not that it has any credibility. I wouldn't say that, but it is. I was like, I could see that happening. Like not so much the abduction story and that being it, but I could see that how he was given information and writing down code and having things compartmentalized. It's very military coded, and that's why I think I go, that's interesting. But again, he did work within the American government, so he would know the ins and outs and be able to write a great story. And he did. And it's not that flashy compared to other stories.
Where all the detail lies in his story, though, is I went to this base and then I did this, and this is how they drove me here. It's all very specific. What's not very specific is what the aliens said to him. There's very little of that.
Yeah, he does get into, they talk about time travel in it and how time travel is possible, but he doesn't really understand the communication as well. So let me ask you a last question before we close out. What makes him different, and what makes Whitley Strieber more believable than Dan Sherman then?
Well, that's a good question. Whitley Strieber is credible to me because he's got some other independent witnesses who, in his own defense, can say, I was in the house the night that Whitley claimed this happened, and I saw the light too, including his wife and friends and other people. And Whitley was able to go submit himself to the hypnosis. He has an implant that he went and got looked at. So Whitley has a higher bar, and Whitley has subjected himself rigorously to people who disagree with him or whatever. And he's told his story and he's stuck with it for 30 some years. Dan Sherman is a bit of a ghost, and it's a thin little book. And I know your penchant, give me a thin book to read because we're both busy and I get it, but it's a little too thin for me. But I do think Whitley is a better witness because of his independent corroboration, not of every detail. I mean, Whitley didn't go on the ship with somebody and have somebody say, I saw him there and blah, blah. You don't have that, but you do have some of that. So
if Dan Sherman would come out of the woodwork and bring a witness forward along with then, be subjected to questioning, then I understand where you're coming from, that there might be more credibility built into it. So I leave it then with Dan Sherman. We ask you to come forward. Hey, if you want to jump on this podcast, you're more than welcome to.
Come on down, Dan. So now I'm going to do the big tease about what we're going to read next month. And it's funny you brought up Whitley Strieber, because I'm not telling, I had 3 books that I was my finalist. My first finalist was Communion by Whitley Strieber, because I was so intrigued by our first show that we did, The Believer, which was, of course, the story of John Mack, as written by Ralph Blumenthal. And I just thought, if you're going to tell that story, you got to go back to the big one. and that would be Whitley. And so that was one of them. The other contestant, which I know you have, you want a shorter book. This ain't it. UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites by Robert Hastings. I mean,
Yes,
this is a book I need to read. I have it.
that.
I own it. I've scanned it. I have not read it cover to cover. I would like to read that sometime. So that's still there. And then the
I would
third
like
one,
to read this as well, though. I have
because
not read
of what you and I have been discussing this time, the third one is this, Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington, which is about how UFO disinformation has been put throughout into the ufology world, and how some of the things that seem to be with us even today started by being put in there by the government or other people with different agendas. So those are the three I had there: Communion by Whitley Strieber, UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings, and Mirage Men by Mark Pilkington. They're all good books, but Chrissy, I'm going to bow to you, my queen here, and we're just going to go with Mirage Men, which is a nice compact little read, because I want to know, because I find more and more I'm concerned about disinformation. Am I being disinformed? Are the things we're listening to disinformation? And I think it might inform my thoughts even about Dan Sherman a little bit.
There you go. And
So
you know
that's it.
what's funny? I have a little story about that book. I actually met Mark. I was at the International UFO Congress the day that he presented, and people were booing and just, get off the stage, you're a government informant. And I was just intrigued by how a man would go in front of a UFO conference, one of the largest, because at that point there must have been at least 1,000 or 1,500 people in the room, and potentially maybe could have been two. It was Alejandro and Karen ran a massive conference. And I remember thinking, wow. So I literally walked up to him where his booth was to sell his book. And I said, hi, my name is Chrissy Newton. And this is way before I had a podcast or anything else. I was probably like 26, 27. Right. And that was last week. Just joking.
Right. Nice save there. I like that.
And so I asked him, and I was like, hi, I'm Chrissy. And I said, why did you subjugate yourself to this? And then I ended up having, and I remember, like, he just said, like, this is obviously what he feels. And so I said to him, would you like to have a drink with me later? So him and his friend did. And we ended up talking, and they were like, just, I think for me, because I wasn't sure, I was just shocked. And I've never seen somebody at a conference present such conflicting ideas. So I was so young and I was just learning, but I wanted to see the other perspective. But he was really gung-ho, and he was so lovely. And he said, yeah, and we had a drink with him and his friend. And I think he probably laughed. And Mark, if you again listen to this podcast and you remember a girl named Chrissy Newton sitting with you, I would love to hear what he thought about me asking questions, and probably a little dumbfounded being so young and going, I don't know if I believe you either. But now, obviously, what Mark was doing was the right thing. And I feel that, and fortunately had such blowback at that conference. Like,
that's fascinating.
I could have screaming at him to get off the stage.
But Chrissy, for this issue to be resolved, we have to not be afraid of dissenting ideas. We have to hear them, we have to think about them, and we have to decide what's worth thinking, which is what we're trying to do with the book club. By the way, this copy I have was sent to me by Mark when it came out in 2010. I think Richard Dolan and I at the time were writing our After Disclosure. Maybe that's why he sent it to me. I don't remember. Maybe our book had just come out, but he signed it to Bryce. They're coming! ! Watch the skies! ! Very best, Mark Pilkington. So you know what? Let's give him a fair read. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. Like, I don't even want to spoil it. We'll read it. We'll discuss it. If we disagree with it, we'll say so. And we'll tell people why we disagree with it. And the things that we agree with, we'll talk about that too. That's the way it works around here.
It's a great choice. It's a wonderful choice. And I should put a side note. If anybody actually wants to read about Black, it is hard to get a copy. Just know that. This is a used copy. You can download it on Kindle, but it is not easy to get an original. That's for sure.
You can get the Kindle pretty easy. That's how I read it. And so that's at a reasonable price and all that. So we've done it again. I tried to be a little nicer this time. I got some blowback from our last episode, people being, why are you so hard on those guys? So I tried to be a nice Bryce this time and not be too hard. And, again, like you said, you've said it. I mean, if this above black is
above board,
something that should be above board, if above black is above board, then I think Dan Sherman probably should talk to somebody. I'd love to talk to him, but if he wants to talk to other journalists besides us, he should update this in 2025. He should tell us what he's up to. He should answer the questions that might be asked about where corroborating stories can come from, because it's not like, I believe there is a phenomenon at work, right? So it's not the hardest thing in the world for me to believe that Dan Sherman's case might actually happen. But what's hard for me to believe is that is the definitive expression of what is happening, because he doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I'm not saying it's the definitive expression of what's happening globally, but it's the definitive expression of this intuitive communication thing, because he needs more proof for that. He just doesn't have it in this book and in how he's discussed it. So maybe in all these years, he's turned up other things. I'd be fascinated. And I'd also want to ask him, by the way, okay, this thing that's coming, that's going to knock out every piece of electronic stuff we've got, what is it? What is your take now? Do you still do this? Have you received alien messages since you left the Air Force? Are you still in contact with anybody? I got a lot of questions. I bet you do too.
Well, he's probably saying it's 3-Eye Atlas. So
yeah, well, there you go. I don't believe that.
Talking to Avi Loeb. Yeah, yeah. But no, I agree too. But it's an interesting little read. It's an interesting little story. It adds to the UFO, mythology of the things that we've been obviously. There's so many different types of books, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was a quick read, but I wouldn't recommend it as a book, as a UFO source of material. Right. I would use it as a side book.
Yeah.
So not for somebody who's getting into the topic. I'd be like, if you've been in the topic for a while and have been in this maybe a couple of years, take a little gander down this road.
Let's just take a page from Apple Music. It's a deep cut, right?
Deep cut.
It's not like UFO Essentials. It's UFO Deep Cut. And from that point of view, if you've already read 100 books, go ahead and read it. But if you're one of the, like I had a friend the other day write me and say, I'm kind of interested in all this, but what do you think would be, he's a military historian, very well read, an accomplished author. And he's saying, this is all kind of interesting. What do you think I should read first? So I certainly wouldn't recommend Above Black to my friend. So, there's other books that you would give him first. So I guess it depends on where you're coming from. And I don't have a problem with people reading it. I'd love other opinions, right? So what do we care? But I guess we're wrapping up another show. This was a fun one. I enjoyed it. I read it fast. I thank you for that.
You're welcome. I know you had a busy month. So, yes. And I'm looking forward to a really busy month, and it's still going too. You still have a wedding to go to. So
I still got to get a son married off on this weekend. So but all is good here. I know all is good with you right now. So for all of you watching, we appreciate that you watch. We appreciate that you listen to our opinions, and tell your friends. That's all I would say. Hit like or subscribe or wherever you are, and tell your friends so that we can build a bigger group of people in the book club.
Yes, please. And get yourself a fancy mug.
Oh, yeah. All right, everybody. See you later.
Guys.
Bye, Chrissy. See ya. Bye-bye.
Project Book Club is produced by Bryce Zabel and Tyler Stevens and is brought to you by Stellar Productions. You can learn more about us and what we do at projectbookclub.net. We appreciate you and hope you'll spread the word. See you next time, because every book you haven't read is a new one.